Hi there, my name is Corey Dundon.
And I'm Michelle Maunder.
And you are listening to Spirited Conversations, engaging and elevating pediatric occupational therapists, a joint collaboration between SEED Pediatric Services and Developmental FX. Each week you'll hear from myself and Michelle as we nerd out with Tracy Stackhouse. Just a note before we start, Spirited Conversations is for informational purposes only. With that, let's jump in to today's episode. Hello everyone, welcome. It's very exciting to be here. We today are going to continue on, although you can totally listen to this episode without having to go back and listen to episode number 3, but we're going to take the little cherub that we talked about in episode 3 further along the journey. So we sort of left that part of the episode open. We talked about that, clinically reasoned through it, and then Michelle was going to take that further, and people have been asking what's going on with these little ones that we've been talking about. So Michelle is going to give us a little refresher, remind us of our little friend, and take us through the next things that happened for you in sessions with him.
What happened next? I'm just finished watching Outlander and The Last Kingdom, so it kind of reminds me of that, the next season of my little guy, who our treatment model is they come on weekly for a block of sessions, and then they have a break, which allows us to see another little family and come back. So the last session, and what I explained, I guess, in episode 2 was really... 3. Okay,
the power of praxis, that one.
Power of praxis. Is this little guy, he was nearly 6 at the time. He came to us with some sensory motor challenges, and specifically that sensory discrimination that was impacting his postural stability and also his planning, specifically that motor execution component. He's a clever guy, and his strengths are his playfulness, his drive to be social, and also his ideation. So he's got this pattern of coming up with lots of ideas and working around that when he's not successful. So he keeps kind of changing the goalposts. The very last session, which was fascinating for me, there was a ball in the room and he just started willy-nilly kicking it around. In every attempt was in another random way. It was firstly his feet, then his knees, and, up the ramp. So we were discussing in the episode this need to stay attuned to him, follow his lead, and be open and ready for his invitation to become more masterful in the activities that he was doing, the play that he was doing, so that we could infuse his play with some more skills or components that was going to help him be more masterful. So refining his sensory discrimination, refining his exec function component of praxis, where he notices he's making an error, noticing that he needs to make some changes, that he needs to problem solve and then act on that and then reevaluate. So I went away after the episode and just really brainstormed. I was like, right, when he comes in next, what are some of the activities I could have crafted in the room available so he wanders in, and we just very kind of naturally, move on to ball play really is where I was going to continue. I thought. And I also kind of came up with some more phrases and language around when he is making errors, how I might just say some things that offered him the opportunity to, have another try really, and I wonder what we could do about it. So I came in with this big kit of things that I was going to have on the ready when they presented themselves. So I did have some balls and I did have some noodles available. And he pretty much repeated the last session and bounced around. And, I was like, oh, hey, tried out a few of my new little things that I was going to infuse naturally into the session. And he ignored them and kicked the ball around. So then I was thinking, I need a hotline to Tracy. What next, Trace? But I knew, I got the feel it was like, wait. Just hold, wait. The opportunities will arrive. And this is, what I'm about to tell you next is just the aspects that I love about our job is that they kids keep surprising you, and you know that we just have to be on the ready, and that we have to be around a lot of theories and a lot of practices, because you just kind of never know what's going to show up. So the little kiddo came for session 2. We're deep in COVID, so he was wearing a mask. He happened to have, it was spring at the time, so he had a little clear dribbly nose, so he was quite alarmed, and just saying, I don't have COVID, I've got a dribbly nose, it's kind of uncomfortable because I've got a mask on, what am I going to do? So as we're walking into the room, which had balls everywhere, I was like, I know lots of kiddos that have trouble blowing their nose. I can help with that. Would you like to work on that? So he was like, yeah, sure. So we sit down. I quickly, remove the balls, run and grab tissues. I just thought to grab the bubble mountain, and we have a oral motor kit. So I pulled out a harmonica from there, but just thinking, I knew that exhaling out the nose wasn't readily available for him. And so we really just started exploring what to do next. I guess in my mind, I just really had to backpedal and think, wow, we're going into task analysis. We're going into ADLs. We're going into, self-care. But he's highly motivated by this. I guess he hasn't been in the past. So I was thinking, how long is this going to last? And, anyway, I just went with what he was offering, which was not in any of the stuff I had thought about before. In terms of activities and in terms of how I was communicating, it was absolutely involving, sensory discrimination and planning, and this goal-directedness and being masterful in
a discrete skill.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I went with it. It was just so fascinating because it was an about turn for me, really. So I guess that's a learning, really. So how that kept playing out is I knew that he could do Bubble Mountain. Anyway, I won't get into details. Is it helpful to know what happened next?
Yeah, I think so.
And I think it's probably helpful to know what is Bubble Mountain, because not everybody does know that.
Our lingo that we just forget. People don't know. Yeah, talk them through Bubble Mountain first, and then we can keep going, because I think it's helpful.
Yeah, okay. So Bubble Mountain is an activity that we've just named that. I think it is a big
people
known.
Call it lots of different things. Yeah, so I can explain it if you want.
Yeah.
Not that you don't know what it is, but it's just we just fill up a bucket with a little bit of water in the bottom and some dish soap, and then we call it chewy tube. It's basically just a big long rubber therapy tubing straw, and you then blow into the water at the bottom of the bucket, and bubbles start to form up and up and up. Almost, it looks like a mountain or a volcano. So it's just another oral motor game that we use to
extend the breath, really. It's a long exhale through the tube.
Yeah.
And it just helps give that visual cue of having a long exhale, which can help with regulation, but lots of oral motor coordination as well. I knew, and we've done that before for the purposes of regulation, so I knew he had a long exhale through his mouth. And so I just thought that was a nice way to start for him to get oriented to his mouth and paying attention to breath. So we were doing that. And really highlighted that he was doing a long breath out his mouth and a big inhale through his nose. So breathing in and breathing out, and was going in different places. So then we did that for a little bit, and I just oriented him to breath and how amazing that you can change up your breath fast and slow and hard and, gradual. And then I pulled out the harmonica, and look, this is pretty in the moment stuff. But so pulled out the harmonica because I could just in my mind that you could do both. So he was breathing through the harmonica in and out, so he could exhale in and out through his mouth, and that wasn't much of a leap for him. He readily got that. So we really quickly then moved on to, let's close your mouth and see if we can blow out your nose. And I had the tissues there, so I just put a few around, and he had to flutter the tissues. Again, there would be more appropriate and fun games, but, you're just kind of going really quickly.
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, now we're going to do it all through the nose. So going in through your mouth and out through your nose. And we can do the same with Bubble Mountain. We can have a long, slow, low tension, I didn't use that word, through the nose, or we can do a short, sharp honk, and when you could do a hard nose blow. So we literally just played around with how you could make air come out your nose and how you could shift air in and out your mouth and nose, and what were we going to do next, and we just got a bit playful about force and coordination of that. Anyway, he just was in the moment of it. I just kept the room. I did have to go out once to get a few more resources. The girls were there. Our clinic door is quite close to the office, so they were hearing me. I guess traditionally, many of the kids I see, I don't get the opportunity to really work on refining tasks at that level and using language at that level as well. Nose blowing hasn't featured in my sessions for a really long time. So I was kind of giggling with the girls and they're looking at me and I was like, I'm blowing noses, So it was just a bit of a giggle.
It's amazing, really.
Yeah. And do you know what? He stuck with it the whole session. His mum had to duck out and do something, so it was in the waiting room. He ran out, was like, can I show Mum? I was like, yeah, you can show Mum. So he went and did a little blow, but it wasn't going to clear the nasal passages. So I was like, let's try that again. So we ran back in the clinic and he got his really big honker kind of blow mastered. Went out and showed Mum and, Anyway, it was just fascinating. Over the weeks, he continued to come with tasks, relating to ADL. So the next week we looked at shoelace tying. He was focused on that. He wanted to then be able to undo a double knot. It was balloon blowing and then balloon tying up. And he, I guess... there's so many things in this. One, I just couldn't believe it when the goal was driven by him and he'd identified it and kept showing up with that. He showed so much more capacity to stick with it and monitor and problem solve and stay regulated and stay on task. I was bored. I was thinking, I'll do this nose blowing for 7 minutes and then we'll get on with the session, you know what I mean? But these tasks were the session and I was the one that kept being surprised because he stuck to it and showed far superior skills in adjusting and refining and regulating. I did happen to have a mini tramp out with a rainbow swing. So there were some things that were available that he made use of when he was getting a little frustrated and then would come back to task and we'd shake that off. And anyway, it just really brought so many things together for me that, the process of clinical reasoning that we might do, the thinking about the doing of and the opportunities that we might provide in balancing with how they show up and what they're asking, when they're ready for help and when they ask for it, they're ready. And his capacity was far greater than what I would have ever given him credit for. And that he kept showing up week after week with these ADL tasks.
It's almost like success bred success for him.
And then let's get into that, get into the performance components of it. Anyway, it was just surprising. It added lots of bits of the praxis of sensory to scrim, so then I kind of had to get a little bit more weaving. I knew that if I just focused on these splinter tasks that I really wasn't going to get to the underlying issues, so I was trying to infuse but not annoy him by trying to add some, more interventions, I guess, that would help set him up to be able to seal the balloon closed, for example, and that I just had to dance around not dampening his motivation with, some stuff for tactile discrimination. And anyway, it was just gorgeous. And it was like, wow, you kiddos continue to teach me to just keep showing up.
I am the executive director of a nonprofit in Denver, and as a nonprofit organization, there's this guru in the United States of nonprofits. Her name is Joan Gary. I bring this up because she says all the time this phrase that sort of lives in my head. And the phrase is, nonprofits are messy. And I always extend that to actually life is messy and therapy is messy and providing intervention can sometimes feel messy. But I love, instead, I want to recode it for myself based on what you said, Michelle, which is you really started by talking about how you're constantly surprised. And I think what's interesting for me, so the first thing I want to say is, this is maybe an Aussie thing to say, but good on ya. It's like,
good on you, mate.
Yeah, good on you, mate.
Australia Day yesterday.
Yeah, it actually was
Good on you, mate.
Because I think it's really, the truth is that we have to be brave and we have to trust and we have to rely on all of our knowledge and our just ability to kind of show up and hold that relationship with the child and the goals and then just see where it goes. And it is sometimes kind of messy. It isn't like I'm going to go down this path. Therapists who want it to be linear and sequential really struggle, right? That's resonating with you, Corey.
I'm laughing because it's like we all want it to be linear and sequential. We have to just
Imagine
continue.
our notes and our planning and our goals
You just
and our
continually
reports.
wrestle with that, wanting it to be clear and linear and it not being.
And then the children show
Yeah.
up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And I mean, even in, neurosequential processing, Bruce Perry's model, where the idea is that it's sequential. It's not sequential in the way that it unfolds, and it's not sequential in the way that we support or scaffold or support it. So regardless of the framework that you're using, when we're with kids, I think clinical reasoning is critically important. And that's why I love that we're doing this podcast, because it allows us to come and reflect together on this nonlinear process. And yet, I think, Michelle, as you were talking, your ability to just respond and hold and then create and co-create with this boy in the moment is really so beautiful. And that working towards adaptation is really what occupational therapists are doing all the time, is working to this higher level of adaptation. And so when you were trying to figure out the ball scenario, kind of sometimes what happens for kids is their needle gets stuck. We talked about that in another episode. And so sometimes, when we're trying to follow the child's lead, and if their needle is a little stuck, we can get a little stuck and it can feel like we're a little bogged down. So the authentic thing that happened for him was that his nose was drippy, and this was a real thing. And what shifted there, the shifting landscape of his sort of development, was pulled by that high route of A, the motivational system. And when his motivational system pulled him toward, I want to do this, and you were able to help him figure out, okay, how are we going to do that? That's a really beautiful, authentic following his lead moment that you could capture and capitalize on. But the reason he was ready in a different way to meet that adaptive challenge, but also your lens of knowing that tuning in with him in a playful way to the elements that were a little bit weak for him, sensory discrimination, interoceptive awareness, and then turning up the dial for him around how can I embody the experience of blowing in a full, rich, interoceptive, sensory discrimination informed way. And, sometimes I think when we see that high route of A switch on, we often see this more cognitively laden activation. Dan Siegel has these 4 E's of cognition that I think you kind of danced through. So I thought it would be fun to sort of mention them here.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I haven't heard of those. So
Yeah, I was thinking
go
the same
me.
thing. I'm
Good on you, Michelle.
yeah.
Yeah, so
Right.
he talks about how there are these 4 E's of cognition. You start with embodied. So you have to have this sensory motor experience, and that sensory motor experience has to be sensory, really laid in the sensation that allows for the skill. So in this way, interoception was really critical for him to embody. The next, so let me tick through the E's and then we'll discuss them for a second. So he talks about embodied cognition, enacted cognition, extended cognition, and then embedded cognition. So sort of what those mean. And again, Dan Siegel is a genius, and his work I'm sort of drawing from here. So go to the primary source would be always my advice. If you're really interested in this, you can go, and we'll put that in the show notes for you. But in applying that to this situation, Michelle, I felt like what you were really doing was first helping him embody that. You were playing with the interoception. You were really helping him explore that. So you were then enacting it. You were putting it into an adaptive act. And at first it wasn't quite nose blowing, right? It was sort of pre-nose blowing. And he could enact that and have success and really find mastery. And when you keep that mastery drive switched on, and you can move from embodiment into enactment, and then you can extend it, and you can say, oh, you have variability here. You can do that with different ways of doing it. You can use your mouth, you can use your nose, you can do in, you can do out, you can do all of this. And then you really embedded it in the actual skill and in context and in something he could leave and take with him. So you danced through those E's. And what you did with that was you really pulled him into full adaptive response. And that is what skillfulness is all about. So what a cool thing. I love it.
Got lucky.
Good on you, Michelle. No, it's your intuition. You just knew how to do that. You have all the OT task analysis stuff at your fingertips as well. So you didn't have any prep because you just followed his lead, but you on the go were like, okay, these are the components that I will need to help highlight for him, and just you intricately weaved in the discrimination pieces and the interoceptive part. So it's really well done.
The bits, I guess, that allowed me to do that hadn't showed up so readily for him in sensory motor tasks, particularly that were a little like an ADL task, is that he stuck with it. Previously, he's moved the guideposts and he would have decided to pull the tubing out of the bubble mountain and decide to flick it or to, pop the bubbles, which he probably did a bit of that. But he would have been like, yeah, bored with that. I'm moving on. This blowing out the nose stuff's a bit tricky, particularly when I just in the moment couldn't come up with anything more amazing or exciting than for him fluffing a few tissues in my hand, make them wobble, make the tissues wobble.
I think that's not too bad a game.
Well, it was enough. There was enough in him. Sometimes, when you just don't get the thing shiny enough or whatever it is, they go off, and you know when that's happening because you see their eyes move, their body move, and it's like, damn it, I didn't, my brain didn't get creative enough to do something other than fluff tissues with your nose, nose blowing. Yeah, but it's just fragile. But his motivational bias, that drive, had him hanging in there through a bit of a tedious task, and it didn't matter so much. I had a bit more scope. He had, wider boundaries, I guess, to sit with that. And I know because he's social and affective driven, I got goofy about it and was like, whoa, just add some stuff where the tissues were pretty lame. But anyway, that was fascinating for me that he stuck with that where he hadn't otherwise. Particularly, it was a bit sedentary. It was not so fun, that aspect of it. So that was new.
It seemed like that piece, though, recruited the...
Yes.
Maybe, is that effortful control there,
Yeah,
Tracy?
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Because I was like, that's obviously that higher out of A then... in terms of strongly motivated towards the task, pulling online and
the attention.
Connecting to the executive function of effortful control and grit, which seems like it's a bit weak for him in other situations, even when sounds like he has been like interested in something, but if he gets a sense of it being slightly too hard, or he's not being quite as successful as he has hoped, that he changes the goalpost, or is that what kind of happens?
I think two things happen. There's an error, and instead of going, oh, how will I fix that error to keep on goal, his brain has snapped to work. Not snapped, goodness. Jumped, sparked. He's had a light bulb to how do I go around that? Oh, I'll find, so he doesn't stay on task so much. So it's more a lateral problem solving, probably because his postural stability and motor execution has been a little lower and slower, but his cognition
and also
is
his
a real
discrimination.
strength. Yeah, that's right. So he just cognitively goes round. So I think that's been his kind of neurological pattern, is think a way around rather than stay on a task.
So what I think is so important for us to pause and think about for a moment is that in that cycle of 4 E's, the first one is embodied. And in his body, he tends to move laterally. And in his attentional system, he tends to move laterally. And in his problem solving, he tends to move laterally. Sometimes we see this pretty deep and profound reenactment from embodiment and then into the attentional system, the same kind of processing. And it doesn't mean it has to stick that way, but he's used to his habit pattern, his occupational habits, if we can refer to them in that way, are to be lateral and not continue to refine and go forward in this more effortful way. So what is interesting is that when we harness this high level of motivation, it helps him to start to embody it in a different way, enact it in a different way, extend it in a different way, and then embed it in a different way. And that creates a new habit pattern of adaptation, and it broadens his neural network. And in so many ways, our clinical reasoning allows us to come back to what does he have capacity for and where are we stretching him to. So you have that in your mind, Michelle, and you have that in your intention with him, and you're holding that. And then you can co-create opportunities for him to not just repeat the same pattern, but to find a way. And attention is such a broad concept. We're kind of talking in the high level executive functioning framework that we have on the Spirit tool. This is connected to that high route of A. And it's really related to this very broad attentional network. But attention is really what is directing our effort and our energy and our capacity. And so if we are attending to something and we attend to it in a way that is more whole, then the attention actually gets bigger. If we attend to something and then have to laterally shift to sort of dodge out of it, then our attention is blunted. And that's kind of been his pattern before. So now he's finding, if I stay on my motivational task and you scaffold my sensory discrimination so that I can do this, wow, something new happened. And it's that part of coming together in the shared occupation of let's explore this and find this and play with it. And your beautiful mastery, Michelle, as a clinician, of affectively, playfully making it interesting enough for him to stick with it, and his motivation to do so broadened this whole experience. So I think that's just really powerful.
I have a few thoughts about that. I was wondering, because he continued to come back and do this with many different tasks with Michelle. You were talking about him moving laterally instead of continuing forward in this sort of effortful way. And Michelle's pointed out the number of reasons as to why he's done that in the past. So I'm wondering, in Michelle doing that with him on this task, if in that process did she start to build the neural network capacity for that to be a thing, be available to him? Because is that kind of what you mean about this attention system getting bigger?
Yeah.
In terms of the neural network is getting stronger for him to do that and sustain with that?
Right, that's exactly right. So these are like pathways, that we carve out. And there's lots of different terminology that's used in the neuroscience literature. One term that's, I think, it paints a picture for me is this idea of canalization. You're digging this deep canal, right? There's another kind of idea. Marty Smith is an OT here in the United States who I do some collaboration with, and she talks about it. She lives in Texas, so this is a state that has a lot of cows. And so she uses a cow analogy to talk about how...
Yeah, walking on the same path.
Yeah, they walk on the same path through the grass, right? And then it creates...
Aussies really could get a visualization of that. Most of them, especially out here.
Yeah.
The animal track. You can really see it.
Gets wider
it
and more entrenched.
Yeah, so if it's wider and more entrenched and he keeps walking on the lateral shift path, what has happened is that you came along as the new leader of the cow pack, and you kind of created a new way of saying, wait, let's stick with this in a different, wider way. And in the nervous system, trying to say, this is the habit pattern that I've been doing. So these strong connections are in the fast processing. In that slower processing, we need to sort of say, no, you know what? I'm going to inch you over here and help you see that you can connect in a different way. So neural networks connect in really fascinating different kinds of ways. And, it's speculative here that we think that we're influencing this level of processing. But when we see a change in adaptation, that change is only happening because something shifted. And so you can picture it that way.
Yeah, I was like reflected in the observation.
Yeah.
And it kept showing up like week after week. He kept surprising me and coming and saying, I want to blow up a balloon, and we pretty much repeated the similar structure of the sessions in terms of how to go, observed it, I wonder what didn't work, broke it down. So I guess I fell into Dan Siegel's 4Es.
And probably like more of a co-op kind of model of collaborative, collaborative problem solving, because that's Ross Green.
Not Ross Green. But that's what it was. I was trying to keep him interested because I know potentially he's gone off in the past, so I was just trying to keep and hold him there. But he just kept showing up with it, and I just can't underestimate how much it blew me away, and that I was sharing that with the girls in the clinic going, oh my God, we're still doing it, I'm doing balloons. I'm tying up balloons for a whole session. Like, it just continued to blow me away. But it's fascinating what the context you're talking about, because was it repeatable? The task he could repeat, and he did keep practicing at home, but that he wanted me to repeat the process, which kind of makes me think that whatever neural adaptation that was happening, he wanted more of that across different tasks. So let's look at this task now, let's look at that. But it became available for him. Yeah, so whether we can measure neurologically what's happening or not, it just is curious to me that he kept wanting more of the same process, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ross Green, you mentioned, so we'll just say kids do the best they can when they can. So when he's with the balls, he's doing the best that he can, because the adaptation in his lateral thinking, he couldn't kind of get on a path forward to something that was more skillful, a little higher level. He was a little stuck, and that was more related to his, our previous analysis, I think in episode 3, around his ideational praxis and all of those functions. And we're still talking about those, but we're talking about them in that spiraling continuum that advances forward. So now he's found a new level and a new landing pad to kind of springboard from. And in that, he's using his own power of motivation to find a higher level of adaptation. And when we work with kids to do that, to really find those springboards and exercise that path forward, wow, it's so beautiful. And it does feel wonderful to us, and it feels wonderful to kids. It feels like I am the master of the universe. You know, I do have mastery drive here, and and it's the most beautiful affective shared moment, and we really feel it. And they need that. They need this, you know, all of this development that is the richest and the most productive happens in the interpersonal space, and it happens in the shared moment. And so what a beautiful, cool job we have to get to do that, right?
Oh, this makes me think of the cows walking down the paddock and ingraining the pathways. And I was thinking about when you start to lead them in that new pathway, to me, if it's more adaptive, then the nervous system is going to just want to start to do that. Instead of him continuing to use that lateral shifting away from, now Michelle has built this beautiful capacity for this new way of approaching things. He's just going to want to naturally go that way, and that's so exciting.
Yeah, but do you know what? I'm even thinking that he was leading me because I was still, you know, he's the leader of the cow pack because I just was still with the balls, gross motor, space, you know, the lots of spatial challenges. His bilaterality in his lower limbs aren't as good as his upper limb. So he was like, whoa, Michelle, we're going down this gross motor, ball, impulsive, high energy path, and I'm not at my best there. So how about, Michelle, I'll take you down to a bit more sedentary, fine motor, cognitive pathway because I'll do better there. And he did. I think we still need to go to the more gross motor ball activities.
But maybe he has more capacity to do that now.
Yeah, but maybe he was leading me there.
Yeah.
It was like, whoa, we're on the wrong track. So I'm not going to claim that I was the cow leader.
No, but you made the pathway more meaningful just by, you know, having that interpersonal experience around that. Totally.
Absolutely. And so did his mum, you know. Just having her not in there at the moment meant that he could race out and share successes with her and then come back and try again. And so it just, you know, happened to fall out or work out really well for us. And you're right, he wanted more of that. But I think he kicked the balls to the curb, not me. I was going to hang around with those balls and work, you know.
You did kick them to the curb, Michelle.
And grab those tissues and balloons and shoelaces.
I love that. You're like, no, he led me down the new path. No, and the other thing that kind of came to mind earlier for me was just this whole, sometimes it feels like we need to teach a skill and the child isn't, you feel like they're not as invested, or sometimes it's like we really need to get them to learn how to use the toilet.
Yeah, it's a carer's or a parent's goal, or just developmentally that's where they need to go, but they're not invested in that.
Yeah, and they're not, and you as a therapist are kind of like, oh, I don't know how I'm going to do this because they're not fueled by that. They're not into it yet. And so, I mean, I thought about an example of a number of years ago now, but a teenager that I was working with quite a moderate intellectual disability, and there was lots of concerns because she couldn't manage her zips and her clothes independently, and privacy wise, especially as she's coming into puberty, and it was a really big goal. And oh man, the discrimination that's required in visually seeing the zip and knowing that it matches and fitting it in and knowing that it's actually pushed all the way down, and all of that stuff that was just really hard for her, similar to your little guy, like the balls, just directing them and controlling his lower limbs and shifting his weight, and just super hard. And
she wasn't motivationally pulled towards being successful in doing up her fasteners.
No, well, I mean, it wasn't something that she could come to me and say, I want to work on this. That wasn't a thing. And so, yeah, I had to really change up the way to approach that, because I feel like we've all had the experience of trying to force a kid to learn a skill when they're not invested, and it's like trying to pull teeth.
It feels so
It's
awful.
so hard. But yeah, for her, it was like, in the way that I was working with her, I had a week of sessions blocked out. So I had this intensive model, and so I knew I had the time to do the repetition. That sometimes I feel like over a week to week I lose the progress for some of that, like, really skill-based things. So it was like, I have these 5 days and I'm going to peg it really slowly over these next 5 days and start really, really simply. I can't even remember how we did it, but I basically was like, what's the very least amount she could do and have success? And I'm just going to jump on that and just be so excited that she's done it. Because that was one strength that I could pull from there, was she was super socially motivated in that way. If your affect was impressed and positive and reinforcing, she was like, oh, I can catch on to that. And that's enough for me. I can use that to sort of sustain, I guess, the executive function effort full control system a little longer. Your affect zhuzhing me along, like, oh yeah, you're into that, so maybe I'll be into that a little bit more. But yeah, it started with such simple nothing really, and then by the end of the week she was doing up her zippers. But I also had to be like, oh, we'll just do 2 more. I can see it's really hard, you're doing really good. But I think it was tough because there was a level of, I really need to help you get this, and then I can see how hard this is for you. Like, this is really difficult given your current level of skill, your capacity in the sensory discriminative system, your postural system. So, there was no way I was going to expect her to stand and do her catches. You're going to have to sit. We're going to have to take out some elements of difficulty here, because it's just not going to fly.
Yeah. And so tell us a little bit more about that clinical reasoning process and how you sorted. How are you going to simplify it? How are you going to amplify these qualities? How are you going to scaffold and structure her? What just each of the pieces, that went into your thinking for that?
Well, it's really interesting because it was a number of years ago, I can even now reflect back and go, oh, there's lots of things that I would have done better than at the time. I was only probably a couple of years out at that point, but even just at the time, I remember thinking, okay, I have to make the first time as successful as possible. So whatever the task is, it can't be putting your zip in and getting it all the way to the top. That just can't be. The task have to really take all the extra, like, other elements out. And maybe the first thing is just being able to hold one side of your jacket and move the zip up and down without the other side even being attached. And the other thing that I remember having was all these other things that she liked to do right after it, so that it was, we're going to do 3 of these. And I gave her a really clear end point of how long are we going to do this hard activity before we go and move into something that you really love to do. And because I've worked with you for a while and know that you love to do that. So it was, she could sort of grasp onto that real set up in advance, that predictability, if we were going through some of your Step SI.
Yeah, like the Step SI can be helpful. And if you had known that at that time,
yes,
it would have helped you to think it through. But predictability isn't only in the Step SI. It's a logical piece that kind of supports and allows for structure. And external structure sometimes supports the ability to kind of carry out something, that and just it alleviates needing to hold on to it internally. So there were so many intuitive pieces that you were kind of coming to. I think developing strong treatment plans is a journey over the course of a career, and I think it's cool to share a story from earlier before you studied a lot of different approaches, and then how different it would be if you were doing it today. That's kind of a fun exercise in a way, right?
Yeah, because I mean, I knew that I wanted to work on this skill. My capacity to break it down, even task analysis wise, or matching her current skill level. So how much was she able to discriminate, see where the zip was going, and feel whether that it was actually in or clicked in, and hold it and then coordinate two hands together to pull the zip up. Even my knowledge around that wasn't as good as it is now. And
just even posturally, you said she had to do it sitting down, so that postural stability, you eliminated that for her.
Yeah, totally. And I don't even know if I on purpose thought about that beforehand, but I kind of intuitively could see that that was not going to happen, you know.
Yeah,
so
it's too much.
yeah, so now I'm like, there's no way, you know, that she would be able to have done that, standing up and coordinate all of her body parts to do that task. And then even just all I was really good at was like really playfully trying to continue to support her to stay with it. I mean, I was not all I was good at, but that was my best skill at that time. And so that was what I knew. I had to reduce the task demand. I knew that the Just Right challenge had to be more simple. And I knew that I had to reinforce when she did anything that was close to what I wanted her to work towards. Because if I had been a little better at all of the other pieces, I would have probably been able to set her up a little bit more with her tactile discrimination beforehand. Or I would have known to have got really big zips. Yeah. Like, get really big zips before you even try to do the jacket that she's using, or you know, I would have had ways that I could have refined that. I just started with the jacket she had, and we just went from there.
But do you know what? Sometimes, a bit like me with my little guy, I just grabbed our stuff in tissues. You know, sometimes you just got to get resourceful and creative about that and go with it. Versus when we have time, you can make your elaborative, you know, arts and craft activity, and, you know, whatever your flavour is, you can get that. But the reality is you just don't. And maybe you could make it a bit, you know, instead of relying on your motivation and your affect to drive, you know, her, is that you put it at the end of an activity that she loves, which might be going for a swim in the pool, and so that you're undressing her, you know, facilitating her to undress to go in the pool, which is naturally more motivating for her. Anyway, in the ideal world, when they line up, you know, linearly. Is that a word? We're making that a word.
When it's all ducks in a row.
Yeah, then I think you can have a perfect plan. But it's
the only cool thing about that situation for me is that I did have somewhat of a plan because she'd come in for this specific 5 days. So it's nice to know my ability to reason for that now would be different to my ability to reason for that when it happened last time. And good on me, I got to the zips in the end. But, you know, like,
good on
and not just me, but good on her. You know, like she did it. She was so happy about it. Like you said, Tracy, with that mastery drive. And she wasn't always 100% successful, but she could feel that something was becoming easier for her. It was becoming a thing that, actually maybe I can do this thing.
Yeah.
And the only reason I wanted to bring that up was because I know there's situations where it's, man, we really have to do this, and I don't know how to get the kids' motivational system on board for this.
It's somebody else's goals.
Yeah.
We see meriting. Sometimes you advocate. It's like, you know what, they're not quite there yet. So you're advocating for the person.
Or just environmentally, they need to be able to manage their bowel for school. And so it's like, oh man, how do we go about this? And I always draw from my neurodevelopmental frameworks in that, even like you said, well, actually they're at this place, so what's the next stretching to for that? Because the people around them are wanting the next stretching to be full toileting.
Right.
It's like, well, the next stretching to is actually just this. So yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what I also think is it reminds me that, you know, within our discipline, we think about those occupational outcomes through task analysis, but really also through that I can do it. You know, it's taking that M off of impossible, getting rid of the M and making it possible. And that might sound kind of corny, but the truth is that when you're in the space with the child or the adult, whoever it is that you're helping, if you can help them find that, I actually can do this. I can blow my nose and I can find joy and I can stay regulated. And so there's an interesting thought here about how the motivational biasing system is a high level of regulation. If you think about it, that, you know, we often talk about dysregulation and all different kinds of images come to our minds, but even in the most dysregulated state, if you're in an I can do it kind of state, I can accomplish this, I want to do that, whatever, it's going to pull you forward. So that state she got into of, wait, oh, maybe I can do this, as soon as you switched her into maybe I have agency and power and capacity here, that keeps you moving regardless of the difficulties. And I think that's so beautiful. So the I can space is a space that we want to always try to find with our kiddos, you know?
In a really genuine way, not that they can't be astronauts or, you know, be the
Whatever
land on the moon, whatever it is, but just in a really, you can, you know, genuinely achieve whatever it is that you're setting out to do, to believe in yourself.
I love that, because that's why I liked doing the work. That's why I continued to come back, because people used to say to me, oh, isn't it sad working with people who have difficulty with doing, I don't know, X, Y, or Z? And actually, it's so satisfying, because that first time that they do something and they look at you and they go, oh, I did it. You're like, yeah, you did. Like, you know, you're just, it's so exciting for that moment to come about. Great way to finish up today. Oh man, we will see you, I guess we'll see everybody next time we record, and maybe I'll have a baby.
We can. Let's do it.
Bye everyone.
Bye.
This podcast is brought to you by Seed Pediatric Services and Developmental FX. For more information, please go to our show notes on our website, spiritedconversationspodcast.com, or catch us on our Seed and Developmental FX Facebook or Insta pages. So grateful to have you with us for this episode. Take care, and we'll see you next time.